thank you, Alana, for joining me for another one of these conversations. In this video, we'll be talking about 3 poems, all of which take birds as their central metaphor. We'll discuss Tennyson's The Eagle, Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson, and Cage Bird by Maya Angelou. 3 very different poems, but all of which are concerned with birds. And we could have added more to this list, couldn't we? There are many poems that seem to be preoccupied with birds. What is it with poets and birds?
Well, the bird is the poet's animal. There's a connection between the bird and the bard, one could say, in the sense that, right, the bird wakes up and sings naturally, cannot help but singing. I'm thinking of Keats' Nightingale singing with full-throated ease, right? It's that the bird is the perfect metaphor for the poet who cannot help but compose.
So a bird is kind of nature's own poet. And so metaphorically, the bird is kind of a double for the poet?
Yeah, also, you listen to a bird song and it's this senseless warbling that you try to make sense of, right? What is the bird trying to say? Is the bird greeting the morning? Is the bird celebrating that it's caught the worm, right? And the same thing with a poem. You hear this music, but it's not always immediately comprehensible. There's often a gap between what you're able to apprehend and what you're able to comprehend, and maybe that's also parallel to the singing of a bird, which we have to make meaning of, or try to make meaning of.
So against the background of that metaphorical category, poets have many possibilities, and in these 3 poems alone, we can see 3 different directions in how poets take that metaphor and also apply it, how they construct the metaphor and what they mean with it. Mm-hmm. Let's get into the poems. The Eagle is one of Tennyson's shortest ones.
The Eagle by Lord Tennyson. He clasps the crags with crooked hands, close to the sun in lonely lands. Ringed by the azure world, he stands. The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls. He watches from his mountain walls, and like a thunderbolt he falls.
The nature of the eagle is such that it lends itself to this magisterial role, right? And here, right, it's the dominant, predator among all the birds, and you really see that there's something very, very frightening about the bird's power here, the bird's potential for intimidation, for rendering everything its prey, and also when you're at the pinnacle of the food chain, right, as the eagle is, right, it's sort of it's lonely at the top, it's like it's all alone, that bird. There's only one personified creature in this poem. It's right. Would you?
Yeah. Also, the sea. The sea is not a person. The sea too is personified as with wrinkled, with the wrinkled sea crawling. But yes, the only
and the sea is beneath him. Right. Everything else is beneath him. Everything else is subject to him.
But the bird, the eagle here, is personified right from the outside with crooked claws and clasps. Although sea sounds
crooked hands, right?
Crooked hands,
really personified.
Crooked hands. They don't really have hands. They have, what I was saying is incorrect. They have claws, not hands. And it is all alone. That's what you were saying.
When you're close to the sun, you're in a lonely land, right?
It's the only.
Not everyone can get that close to the sun.
It's the only living being in this poem. It is all alone. It is used. That metaphor is used in lonely lands, and it's surveying its domain, which gives this.
Which is the world, right? The only thing equivalent to that bird, to the eagle, is the azure world. Like the whole world is equivalent to the bird.
But it's high up. There's that sense of it being up on that crag, on the cliff, surrounded by the walls, with the ocean, its domain far beneath it. What's the relationship between the bird and what it sees?
Well, the bird is watching, the bird is looking down, everything is potential prey. The bird is looking for what it's going to pounce on, descend upon. So there's
What is the metaphor here? What does the eagle seem to represent to you based on what we've described? The personification, its loneliness, and it being the only only living object in this poem.
We said the bird is the poet, right?
You think so? Perhaps. I would disagree. I would think that the poet actually is describing this. There's no one else. There's no observer. It's just the observed. It is a feeling of remoteness. I think what you're absolutely correct. It's a feeling of the royal power, something that is a remote and absolute sovereign, perhaps monarch, a king, someone ruling from afar, and that threat of violence is very real. And that is at the end of the poem made concrete with another metaphor. It's made concrete, but metaphorically, through the simile of, and like a thunderbolt, he falls. The metaphor of the eagle itself is compared to something from
of tremendous, awe-inspiring, fearsome power.
Of the thunderbolt. Where does that come from, a thunderbolt? Does that remind you of anything?
Thunderbolt, Zeus, the Greek mythology, the tremendous power of the gods, like the mercurial power of the gods. That the gods we're all at their mercy.
So these distant, unquestioned, but all-powerful figures, and also the imagery lends itself. The azure, the blue seas, the remote mountain heights.
Right, like Homeric epic, yeah.
The imagery lends itself to that.
Yeah, I guess where I was trying to go when I said perhaps, if we're taking the association between the bird and the bard, the poet and the eagle, right? The poet, in a sense, surveys the world from a remote point, is looking down, and everything is a potential poetic subject, right? And in a way, I think that's where I was trying to go with it. The bird can pounce upon anything, right? Anything can become subjected to the poem, and that's the power of the poet. That the whole world is at its disposal. It's a very lonely role, right?
And we know that Tennyson's very interested in this relationship between the poet and observation.
Tennyson was sort of the lone magisterial poet. He was the poet laureate of England from 1850 till he died, I think. So latter half of the 18th century, he was sort of I don't know what the word is, but he was kind of the sovereign of poetry in a way, right? And also that meant that he sort of policed, and what was acceptable poetry. Well, he set the standards for poetry of his era. So he was not just the poet choosing, like any poet, his subjects. He was also the poet choosing the poets.
Interesting. Let's look at a poem, another one, where there's a little more relationship to this bird. And this will be Dickinson's Hope is the Thing with Feathers. Enjoy the poem.
Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that would abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, and never in extremity it asked a crumb of me.
This is a remarkable poem, Hope is the Thing with Feathers, and it introduces the metaphor as a direct statement, a claim, not a simile, but hope is that thing with feathers that perches in the soul. Here, the bird is within. The bird is that hope that rests within the soul. How is this is a very different metaphor, but still, of course, is using the metaphor of the bird. What is the bird here?
The bird is the part inside of us that keeps hoping against all odds. Hope, on the one hand, hope can be a source of salvation, right? If you can, in the depths of despair, continue to hope, then you don't give up on life, right? Your depression doesn't overcome you. On the other hand, hope can sometimes be very stubborn and very persistent, and you don't always want to keep hoping, right? And she sort of alludes to that, right? And sings the tune without the words and never stops at all, right? Like sometimes it's almost like the persistence of hope betrays you, right? It's like the more you hope, the more you continue to feel disappointed. And sometimes you just want to tell yourself, like, I wish I could just stop hoping. I wish I could just stop hoping. And then I wouldn't constantly experience the pain of disappointment. And yet you know, the poetic soul can never stop hoping, right? We're always yearning for more. So maybe that's some of what's going on here.
And it never stops. It's heard. Here, the bird, the hope, is that element that continues to sing even in the most violent storms. This little bird that keeps so many warm, that is still heard even on the strangest sea, and never asks even a crumb of me, is something within us. There's a me, the speaker, and there's the bird. But the bird is not a metaphor for the self. It is almost like it is that innermost, essential, as you said, almost unvanquished, inconquerable
It's
self.
like when you're feeling very down, you want the whole world, right? The pathetic fallacy. You want the whole world to be miserable with you, and yet the birds keep chirping. And I get the sense that, you know, what inspired this poem, Dickinson was feeling very lonely and very depressed in her attic at Amherst, or wherever she was, right? Amherst, right? Yeah. And she the birds keep singing, and she's thinking to herself, like, those darn birds, will they ever shut up? What are they so happy about? What are they so happy about? What do they have to be so happy about? You know, and she's like, come on, like, give up already. And it's like the persistence of hope that just, as humans, we never stop hoping. Like, we never stop fighting for the world to be better than it is. We never stop working for the world to be better, even when all the evidence is stacked against us.
But she's not locating the bird out there. She's not observing them.
Well, the bird is a
bird
part of her.
is within.
Right,
It perches within.
For sure.
And where is that storm? It's not a storm that she's witnessing.
Right, it's an inner gale. It's an
internal storm.
Yeah.
Right? Excellent. Without further ado, let's look at one last poem, and a 20th century poem from the 1980s, like 1970s, 1980s, by Maya Angelou, Caged Bird.
You know, we all have the same words at our disposal, a dictionary full of them, but it takes a poet to spin them into gold, as Maya Angelou did. We end tonight with some of her most famous words from the poem Caged Bird, about the struggle for freedom.
A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the currents end.
And dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dare to claim the sky.
But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage.
His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing.
The free bird thinks of another breeze.
And the trade winds soft through the sighing trees.
And the fat worms waiting on the dawn-bright lawn, and he names the sky his own.
But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams, and his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream.
His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing.
The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown, but longed for still.
And his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom.
Well, we should preface this, I guess, by saying that this poem was used in the very beginning of Maya Angelou's memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings.
Yeah, which itself is taken from the work of another poet, by Dunbar, in 1899, a poem called Sympathy, and it's his line, I know why the caged birds sing, that was suggested to her and which Maya Angelou used as the title of her memoir, and that led to this poem. The poem is itself a meditation on the notion of freedom, and it compares two different birds, the free bird and the caged bird. What is the relationship between these birds? What do they seem to represent them?
You would think at first that obviously the free bird is preferable, right? Like we all want to be the free bird. We don't want to be shackled. We don't want to be. Who wants to be seeing the world through? How does she describe the bars of rage, right? And yet the free bird, there's something very maybe superficial shallow about the free bird. Like all it can think about is, when it's going to find the next worm. The free bird is thinking of fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn, right?
The free bird is a bird.
The free bird is just a bird wanting its worms, right? Whereas the cage bird is someone who's been oppressed and downtrodden and has no hands because the hands are tied to the cage, and no feet because the feet are tied to the cage. And what does that leave this bird that has no freedom of movement? All the bird can do is sing, right? It's like that singing is the limit, the limit and the extent of that bird's autonomy, and in desperate need to assert itself, that cage bird can do nothing but sing, and so the bird sings. The free bird doesn't need to sing, right? It can leap. It can look at the verbs. It leaps. It floats. It dips. It thinks, right? But the cage bird is the one that shouts and sings and trills and what have you, right? Right? The cage bird has only its voice, and in a way, maybe that's saying that maybe that's a metaphor for the poet also. That the poet who is ostensibly, right, happy and carefree, or sorry, the person who is ostensibly happy and carefree has no need to sing, right? Because it has nothing to dream of. All it needs, all the fat worms are right there for the taking. But the cage bird, which has nothing immediately available to it, the cage bird, where the be all and end all of its existence is its yearning, right, for all it doesn't have, that bird of course is going to sing. And maybe that's the situation of the poet. The poet is someone who, for whatever reason, feels like all it has, or its primary way of engaging with the world is through its voice, through its words.
Wonderful. So in this poem, as opposed to in Tennyson, the eagle is this symbol of power, perhaps arbitrary violence, and in Dickinson, where the bird is this inconquerable, indomitable force within, despite the pain of life, the caged bird is one mode of being from whom poetry, artistry, song emerges from the condition of constriction and imprisonment.
Right, I'm thinking of, is it Wordsworth? If by sweet rhymes our English must be chained, right? That poetry emerges from constraints, right? Wordsworth, assuming it's Wordsworth, describes all meter as being like shackles, right? Like you choose a poetic form and then you're bound to that form and you have very limited range of motion. And yet what does the poet do? The poet takes, a metrical style, right? Like this is going to be my meter. This is going to be the shape of my stanzas, right? This is going to be the length of my poem. I'm going to write a sonnet. It's going to be 14 lines. It's going to be iambic pentameter. It's going to, whatever, right? And within those bars of its cage, the shackles of rhyme and meter, it sings, right? And the music is far more beautiful than the free bird that has no shackles and can just say whatever it wants.
And
right?
so even here, though Maya Angelou is talking about historic
the metaphor to the poet is that the poet is the caged bird, caged and constrained by formal constraints.
Good. And how these poem metaphors are developed. One, where it's just the eagle, there's no observer, and the eagle itself is then converted into that simile at the end, like a thunderbolt. The strong metaphor that carries through Dickinson, where hope is that thing with feathers that perches in the soul, that still sings unabashed in the gale, and so on.
Right, and also that the
here,
caged
where
bird,
there's a comparison of two different birds.
And what is the caged bird singing of? What is its poetic subject? Freedom. What the other bird has and doesn't. Right. If you have something, you don't sing about it. Like if you have. I'm thinking of our
out of lack.
Right.
Out
You sing out of lack. Right. Not to have is the beginning of desire as well.
Privation and deprivation.
Yes. Desire, and you don't sing about what you have plenty of. But the caged bird sings of everything, out of its longing for everything the free bird has.
And it's precisely because its wings are clipped, because he cannot fly, that he sings. Okay. Thank you so much, Alana. It's really a pleasure discussing these texts with you, and I hope everyone gains something from this discussion.